All right, here we are live with Benn May, and we're talking about communally inflicted trauma, but we're also going to talk about what it means to deconstruct, to figure your path out, because you have a really interesting story. So you grew up in the evangelical church, right?
Yeah, I grew up what's called Missionary Baptist.
Okay, Missionary Baptist, which feels like, and let's get a little bit closer, which feels like scary Baptist.
Yeah, I compare it often to growing up as close to a modern day Puritan as you could get. Like, we didn't clap in church.
Okay.
You were only ever allowed to say amen.
Okay.
No dancing, no swearing.
No dancing.
No drinking. No smoking, anything.
Right.
Yeah, so... but also believed in once saved, always saved. So it was a really paradoxical kind of upbringing.
To say the least.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so what region of the country was this in?
So I originally grew up on a 90-acre farm in southeast Oklahoma.
Okay.
And then moved to northeast Texas to a big enough city that had a Walmart in the town. So really metropolitan. Graduated with 100 kids. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you grew up in that context. Mm-hmm. Did you go to church every Sunday?
We went to church 3 times a week.
Well, okay, so 3 times.
So twice on Sunday, Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and then Wednesday nights.
Okay, yeah. Okay, now that you say 3 times, I realize, yes, I generally went 3 times because I did Sunday morning and Sunday evening. And our Sunday evening service was the one without hymns, but with like praise choruses.
Oh, we would never have... Oh, a guitar in church was too liberal. That would not happen. No, it was basically part 2 of whatever you sat through that morning.
Okay.
And then once a month, it was our business meeting where the church would vote on things. And yeah.
Wow. So that's... I mean, like... I feel like people can get a real picture of what that means. Then, at some point, right, things start to unravel. For some people, there's like, they can pinpoint, oh yeah, that was the first horrifying thing I experienced. Some people sort of like a gradual, and they're like, yeah, somewhere around here was when things started. Where did it start for you?
I think there were 2.
Okay.
So my father was considered... kind of a well-respected man in the church, all of that, but also was a domestic abuser.
Oh, wow.
So from an early age, I was like, why is it that every Sunday he physically fights my mom, abuses my mom, but then we go to church and everyone's like, he's such a good man.
Yeah.
So I already started to be disillusioned, and then really kind of the first moment where I was like, something isn't right.
Yeah.
I was probably 8 or 9. Our preacher had allegedly, and I say allegedly because he presented no proof, saw a congregant having a beer somewhere.
Okay.
And so he brought it to a vote.
Like he saw a specific person.
Yes.
And then he named that person.
In front of everyone.
Having a beer.
Having a beer.
Okay. I'm sorry. Like... Can you give us a little bit of when did that happen? How did that come up?
So at one of these Sunday night business meetings, he said, and mind you, this person wasn't here, so it wasn't like the person got a chance to defend himself.
Oh my gosh. So you're at church Sunday night having the business meeting,
and he says, this person, I saw them.
Brother Ed.
Yes. Out and about having a drink.
Wow. Like at a restaurant?
Didn't even give that.
He didn't give any detail.
No, just
I saw them having a drink.
Right. And so he said, and this person was part of a family that had been part of this church for forever.
Oh my gosh.
And he, in front of everyone, said, this person, I saw them having a beer. Mm-hmm. That's not in alignment with our values.
Okay.
And we think that he should be voted out of the church roster.
Voted out. Like, what does that mean?
So when you are baptized, your name goes on the church roll.
Okay.
And that means you're an official member, signed, sealed, delivered, part of the church.
You're definitely going to heaven.
Definitely going to heaven. Definitely going to heaven wearing this T-shirt that says you belong to this church.
Right.
And this basically said, we don't think his salvation was sincere.
Oh, wow.
Or that he wants to change.
Wow.
And so rather than call him in or have some sort of like restorative practice, we're going to vote him out.
Wow.
Because he doesn't represent who we are.
Wow.
So
would he be able to come back to church?
No.
Okay. So.
Or if he did, he would have to do some like major atonement.
Right.
Public humiliation.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So how old were you when that happened?
I was 8 or 9, so I was a kid.
My gosh.
And I remember, so the rule was once you were baptized, you could be a voting member.
Okay. And had you been baptized?
I had been baptized,
Okay.
which is a whole other
question
like,
of.
I had a breakdown being like, I think God hates me, and I was all of 7. And so I was a voting member. And so first they said,
This is wild. You are 8.
Right.
Or 9.
Yeah.
And
I'm a child.
you are going to be asked to vote on whether or not this adult man who was seen to have a beer got to be part of the church.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it wasn't a private vote. It was literally a show of hands.
Oh my gosh.
And so as a child, what I'm not going to do is publicly vote against anything.
Right.
Because to be seen as going against anything.
Like the crowd, right?
Yeah.
Public, like a vote not against him, but like, in opposition to the majority.
Yeah.
Right.
And so first they asked who's in favor. It was unanimous.
Oh my gosh.
He had other family members, cousins and things. We're a small enough town that everyone's kind of related.
Yeah.
Had family members vote him out.
Wow. And he wasn't even there.
Wasn't even there. Didn't make a statement. Didn't get to defend himself. It was purely the minister. I wouldn't even say minister. The man who said God had spoken to him as a pastor.
Oh my gosh.
Saw this behavior and therefore he had to be gone. And there was no, what's your proof? There was no discussion.
Yeah.
It was purely like, this is it. And I remember driving home that night, and we get back to the house, and I talked to my mom, and I was like, so can you be voted out of heaven?
Wow.
Because in my mind, we had just condemned this man to hell.
Right,
like,
right.
Because we also were taught that our church or our view was the only correct view.
Right.
It wasn't just non-Christians were wrong.
Yeah.
It was Methodists are wrong.
Right. Catholics.
Anyone who is not part of our church is wrong.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I was like, we just voted this man to hell.
And you did.
Right.
Right? I,
as a child.
As 8 or 9, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I cast my lot and condemned this man who, mind you, his mother and my mother for many years had been close friends I had grown up with.
Oh, man.
But was like, well, you went against what we believe, so into the fire. Which is, looking back, is so wild on like so many psychological levels.
Right.
But we did it, and then we continued the meeting. Like, it wasn't like that was the only thing. It was like, okay, so we voted him off. Let's talk about repairing the roof.
Right. And let's just also, just for everybody who's listening or watching, you're a mental health advocate. You have graduate level training in mental health. Like, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But okay, so you go home. You ask your mom, can you vote somebody out of heaven? What did she say?
She was like, well, hopefully this will teach him a lesson. Hopefully it'll open his eyes. He'll realize his mistakes. And that will be how he comes back.
Yeah.
And so that was because of that decision. He was voted out. Obviously, the rest of his immediate family was like, cool, we're out.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
And this is a town of 300.
Oh, jeez. Oh, my gosh.
I mean, there were like 7 churches in a town of 300, which is also absurd.
Right.
But
that's another thing. Yeah.
And so I remember, started attending the Assembly of God.
Okay.
Which we thought they were too liberal. Like, they spoke in tongues, and so we were like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So it was a really big upheaval. Wow. Yeah, and I just, from a very young age, was like, cool, you can be voted out of heaven. That's what I have learned.
That is wild. So when you, I'm just like, I'm reeling from this. So you voted this guy out of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
You said there's 2 things. Mm-hmm. What was the second thing?
The other thing was, this was very much so a fire and brimstone.
Right, of course.
You're right. Everything you do, straight to hell.
Yeah.
And I couldn't rationalize seeing people who are supposed to be good people, leaders of the church, whatever.
Your dad.
My dad. Doing bad things, but it was okay. Like, it just didn't make sense.
Right.
How could my father be so respected, so upheld as like an example? Mm-hmm. And then I know what's happening at home.
Yeah.
And as I got older, my mom started telling us stories that happened during that time. My mom would go to the other women in the church and say, like, I don't know what to do.
Right.
My husband is, and this wasn't like, oh, he shoved her.
Right.
Like, this was pretty
violent,
pretty bad. And I saw things from an early age that were pretty scarring. And she would go to the other women in the church and they would tell her, well, what are you doing to make him angry?
Oh, wow.
Like, you as a woman, your job is to serve your husband. Mm-hmm. And like, are you being too argumentative? Are you being too loud? Wow. Are you following what it means to be a woman in the spirit?
Oh my gosh.
And, these were people who genuinely believed, those verses that say like a woman should be treated like, livestock, basically. Yeah. And they really saw it that way, that you as a woman, your job was to tend to the children, take care of the home. You could be a Sunday school teacher.
Yeah.
You would never be a voice in the church.
Yeah.
And so early on, I was like, this doesn't make sense.
Right. I mean, and especially I feel like as I'm listening to you, you juxtaposed the highly respected person who is like privately not great or horrible with the fire and brimstone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because it is a very contradictory belief to say once saved, always saved, which was foundational.
And explain for people who didn't grow up in an evangelical world where there's that random argument. What does that mean? So
once you have accepted Jesus specifically, you went through the ABCs, which if you don't know the ABCs of Christianity, it's we learned this as a child. Like there's a song.
Oh, wow.
It's A, admit to God you are a sinner. Uh-huh. B, believe that Jesus is God's son. Mm-hmm. And C, confess your sins.
Right.
Those were the ABCs.
Right.
Again, I was singing that at like 7 years old. Once you go through that process and you are baptized, that's it.
You go to heaven.
You go to heaven.
Done.
But this was also... So then how do you enforce moral anything? Well, it became... I was taught if you're a good person, you would, Christ has said, I go to prepare a mansion for you. There are heavenly mansions. If you're a good person, you get a mansion.
Okay.
If you're a... Can I curse on this podcast?
Oh, yeah. All the interviews end up with explicit text.
If I'm a shitty person, but I am saved, I can still go to heaven. But I will have a less grand house.
It's just what you do on earth is like the value of your heavenly home. Like if I'm really shitty, I've got a shack.
Oh, literally, we were taught that like people who believed in Jesus but did really bad things lived in tents.
Tents
in heaven.
So that's the lowest.
This
level.
Is your religious credit score. Like that is how it was treated. And that
what?
Because it wasn't prosperity gospel in the sense of like if you pray hard enough you'll be rich on this life.
Right.
We totally accept because this was a farmer town. Like no one was rich.
Nobody's rich, yeah.
And so but we were very much so taught like in the next life is where it matters.
Yeah. Okay.
And
so now that we've got what once saved always saved is, the fire and brimstone.
Everything was a condemned to hell offense.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was like, how did these two marry together?
Right. So he's doing things that should, in the churches, when the pastor preaches a sermon, should condemn him to hell, and yet he is being treated as like not just going to heaven, but having a big house.
Right. And also, I got the sense that many of the men that I grew up around viewed physical discipline of your wife as reinforced by the teachings of the church. Oh, wow. I mean, I grew up, I was not physically abused, but I definitely, corporal punishment was like very much so a part of my life. And, but it, spare the rod, spoil the child was kind of applied to your wife.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And, you know, my grandmother, my dad's mother, because the church I'd gone to, my family has been going to since before the state of Oklahoma was a state. Okay. That's how old this church is. My grandmother admitted, I think once, that my grandfather had hit her. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, you know, I made him mad. It was my fault. And that was reinforced by I had tried to rise too high as a woman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
that's the beginning. Where at what point are you're starting to leave, or you're like I can't anymore?
That really came for me, I guess, college.
Okay.
So when we moved to Texas, we moved from Missionary Baptist to Southern Baptist.
Oh, so you went to the Liberal Baptist.
Well, and by comparison, they had a guitar, and I remember the first time they played a guitar, I was like, "What is happening?
I'm going to hell right now."
Right. Yeah. And my mom was a single mom at that point, and she left religion altogether.
Okay.
She maintained being very Christian. But she was like, I'm being judged for being a single mom. Right. Like, it's just not an environment for me.
Yeah.
But it was important to her that my brother and I still went.
Okay.
And then in middle school, I said, I don't really like this church anymore. All of my friends that I was really close with were going to the Methodist church.
Okay.
So I was like, can I go to there?
Right.
And my mom was like, great. You're going to church. I don't care.
Right.
Then I came out.
Ugh.
So
in the Methodist church.
In Texas.
In what time frame?
This was 2004,
right.
5. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, because I'm celebrating my 20th year of being out.
Wow.
And the Methodist church itself, at this point, I mean, we were having the discussion that eventually led to the schism we've now seen in the Methodist church of, are gay people basically allowed?
Right.
But when I came out, my mom insisted I go to church every Sunday. And I go to youth group every Sunday night. So she wasn't going to church. My stepfather, my siblings, no one.
Wow.
I was woken up.
You were kidding me.
On Sunday morning, dropped off at church. And like that was the expectation. It's like, we're not going to go to church, but you're going to go to church.
Wow. And
so I think, like many of us do, I became the golden child of the church. I was a camp counselor.
But you were out.
I was out.
Okay.
And I met other Methodists who were affirming. My youth minister at the time, very affirming, was like, yeah,
great.
you're gay. Cool.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's amazing.
That was amazing.
That's so not the experience of queer people in general.
And not being reinforced anywhere else.
Right, yeah.
So the church that we had attended previously, their pastor straight up did a sermon and called me out in it.
You specifically?
Yeah, it was like, there's this gay boy at the high school who used to go here, and you all know who it is.
Oh my gosh. So hang on. So you aren't going to that church anymore?
No.
Your family's not going to that church?
Nope.
You're at the Methodist church?
Yep.
And he does the guy at the other church does a sermon about you.
Oh, about the
about
youth,
whatever, but you're the example.
Yeah, I was one of the shining
degenerate
examples of.
And this is this big town? I mean, it's got a Walmart. How big is the high school?
I graduated. There were 500 kids in my high school. I graduated with 105.
Oh wow! And like, now he said there's a queer kid at the high school. Was there a queer kid?
So I was the only out guy.
Okay.
Lesbians or bi women got a weird pass. Like, they were out, but no one, I mean, people had opinions, but no one talked about it. But for a guy to be out was like a big deal.
Well, yeah, it's this toxic masculinity.
100%. It's reinforced by like,
because like they think that women kissing is hot.
Right.
So it's like it's all wrapped in toxic masculinity.
And, you know, the joke of it all is I certainly was hooking up with men in my high school, or other guys, who now are like full Trumpers and like anti-LGBT. And I'm like, hi, I definitely blew you behind our elementary school. So like, love that that's your journey.
Yeah.
Don't know that your wife knows that, but like happy to tell her. And you know,
so you come out in high school and preacher of the other church does a sermon about you. You're the only out guy in school. Methodist youth pastor, cool. Is that church cool, or are you kind of like semi out there?
I'm out.
Okay.
Regardless.
Okay.
Because Methodism isn't a fire and brimstone religion. It was always kind of that, like, some families were like, oh, we love you. It's affirming. We don't care.
Right.
Some families were like, well, we wouldn't choose it for our children.
Right. But they let you be a camp counselor.
Right.
So, I am ordained in the Methodist Church. I've lived through all of this crazy stuff, and there are some churches during that time that, like, if you had been out, they might have been nice to you, but if you became a camp counselor, it would have been a thing. Right.
And I think, so, as you know, Methodists love to vote on things. They love to debate it. We're going to have a conference. We're going to legislate religion.
Yeah.
There's the youth annual conference, which is the high school version of that.
Yep.
And I was sent as a delegate.
Yep.
To our youth annual conference, and this is Bridgeport Camp and Conference Center in North Texas. Met some incredible people there who I'm still really good friends with. But I remember one year at YAC, the topic we were debating was someone had proposed a letter writing campaign to the governor of Texas, which at this time was still Rick Perry.
Okay.
About whether or not queer people, which we weren't using the term queer at that time, but whether gay people could adopt or should be able to adopt.
Right.
And some of the youth got up and spoke about, you know, the importance of a mom and a dad and blah, 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 all the traditional tropes that you hear.
All the stuff they heard their parents say.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
A lot of parroting. I stood up and said, I'm gay. And here's why I think it's actually more important that a child is raised in a home with love. And, you know, all the things that now I have the research to back up. But at 14 or 15, I didn't.
Right.
And it was met with a mixed smattering of applause.
Okay.
Because like many gay kids, if you've ever read The Velvet Rage, I was the Velvet Rage. I had straight A's. I was president of every club.
Over-functioning.
Yeah, you could not fault me for anything.
Yeah.
And so I became, for many people, for better or worse, I became the gay example.
Right.
I think in some ways that helped.
Yeah.
Because it was like, well, Ben's a normal person and like a good person. But in other ways, it became everything I did. I was both fighting the stereotype of what being gay was and trying to define myself.
Yeah.
Right. Because as we know, just because they did it on Queer Eye doesn't mean I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But also, I might choose to do it. And it's not because I'm gay.
Right.
It's because I'm interested in it. And I shared recently, being gay gave me the freedom to explore those things.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was really hard to kind of define that because it felt like, well, so my undergrad is in theater. I have a BFA in directing. And so did I go into theater because I'm gay, or did I go into theater because that was one of the affirming places where like my theater teacher was hugely impactful in my life? Like, shout out to Carrie Anderson. She was like my safe space.
Yeah, for sure.
So of course I naturally went towards theater because it was the place I could belong. But yeah, in high school I was the only out kid, not well received. Had death threats, was told almost daily I was going to hell.
Yeah.
Teachers felt it was necessary to chime in. Yeah, I had... And it was all in the very Southern tradition of, well, I care about you.
Right.
That was from the women.
Right.
The men were, hey, slur.
Right.
I don't want you around me. I don't want to catch it.
Right.
Oh
my gosh.
Yeah.
So
that was starting
you were very much, I mean, like, you went to Youth Annual Conference. Like, you were very much in the thick of religion in high school. And then
in college, I knew... So I went to college in East Texas, in a bigger town than what I grew up in, but it's further in East Texas, so further from a city. And I kind of went through this phase of, what do I believe?
Right.
So I was a religion minor. So I started studying religion academically. First I went to, somehow this town in East Texas had a UCC church.
Okay. And what is UCC?
Universal Christian Church. And so very liberal, very spiritual.
Yeah.
Their song that we ended every service was, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. Like, that's the vibe.
Like hippie.
Yeah,
just
very
hippie.
Yeah. And I went to that and I was like, this is nice. They don't hate me because I'm gay, but like, it's still kind of weird. And then I went to agnostic.
Okay.
And I consider agnostic often to be the shopping period of religion.
Okay.
Because it's like, I know there's something. I don't know what to call it. Some people say I don't need to call it anything.
Right.
I said, no, I like church and I like ritual. And at that same time, I was taking a comparative world religions course.
Okay.
And I started studying Judaism academically.
Right.
Wasn't quite ready to say, like, I think I want to be Jewish, but I was like, there's something that resonates with me. And then I moved. I graduated, moved to North Carolina, to Raleigh, and religion kind of went by the wayside for a while.
Right.
Because I was like, I'm working in professional theater. I don't really have time to go to church.
Yeah.
What do I believe? And I was like, I'm kind of curious about this thing. And then I got a job offer in Maine.
Okay.
I moved to Maine.
Wow. That's a long way from
Yes.
deep East Texas.
And I had never been to New England. I knew nothing. I was like, there's an ocean, there's lobster, there's moose. That's what I know. I moved up there and I lived with a Jewish person my first year there.
Wow.
And asked just a lot of questions and a lot of stupid questions.
Yeah,
like, mundane things that if you had grown up in a real city exposed to other religions,
Yes.
you might
Right.
know. But I grew up like, it wasn't, are you Christian? It was, which church do you go to?
Yeah, right.
And so started asking questions and getting curious. And that continued. And then I went to a synagogue for the first time.
Uh-huh.
And had
And what kind of synagogue?
Reform Judaism.
Okay. So this is not the people that still like wear the talit and that kind of stuff.
I wear a talit when I pray.
When you pray, but not like under your garments.
Yeah, it's
all
not
day
under my
long.
garments. I don't have payas, clearly. I don't wear the big furry hat.
Right.
I don't have my own hospital. Like, so that's all orthodoxy or ultra orthodox.
Uh-huh.
Reform Judaism says, if it doesn't work, don't do it.
Yeah.
If this gets in the way of your religion or your connection to God, don't do it.
Yeah.
And the rabbi that I met and who I eventually converted under is a gay man.
Okay.
And that was huge.
Oh yeah. Of
I was like,
course.
whoa, 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 whoa. Not only are you in this religion, but you're
Yeah.
leading this religion.
Yeah.
But the two biggest things about Judaism that really grabbed me, and I think now as my work as a social worker makes sense, there's a concept called tikkun olam, which is to heal the world. So tikkun olam says the world is broken. We
Right.
acknowledge that. We don't really care why it's broken. It's broken.
Yeah.
And our job is to help heal the world in whatever ways that we can.
I love that.
Yeah, leave it better than you found it, kind of. And then so conversion into Judaism takes 2 years. It's a long process.
Yeah.
I'm going through this process, and I go to my first Yom Kippur service.
Yeah.
Yom Kippur, most holy day in Judaism. It's the Day of Atonement and Remembrance. We spend all day fasting, all day in service, praying. Sounds super fun. What I love about Yom Kippur is there's a point in the service where in our atoning, it isn't, I've been really terrible.
Uh-huh.
I'm a bad person.
Right.
It is, because I am human, we have all done these things.
Yes.
We have all fallen short. We have all lied. We've all done this. We've all done that. We've all made mistakes.
Yeah.
And we as a community are turning it over
Yeah.
and saying, we're sorry for our shortcomings. And we're starting a new year.
Yeah.
Because for those who don't know, the High Holy Days in Judaism starts with the new year, so Rosh Hashanah. And we say that is when the book of life is opened.
Right.
On Yom Kippur, that's when the book of life is sealed for another year. And so what we say to each other is, may you be found in the book. We say it in Hebrew or Yiddish, depending on who you are. But what we're saying is, I hope you have another year. I hope you have another year of being part of this community.
Right.
But it is a collective call to atonement,
That's so cool.
which is so not what I grew up with.
Yeah.
Because there's no judgment there.
Yeah.
There is no, you're a bad person because you've lied or you've done this or you've done that. It's, you're human.
Yeah.
And if we are all seeking to heal the world, we have to acknowledge that we all participate.
Yeah.
Judaism is very rooted in the cycles of the earth, and there's a huge call to social justice. There's a huge call to environmental justice. Our job is to make the world a better place than when we found it.
Yeah.
And that's not about saving you.
Right.
Jews don't proselytize. We don't go door to door. You will never
Right.
see a Jew be like, hey, you should come to synagogue, spend 2 years doing this.
Right.
You know, in Orthodoxy, you're actually rejected several times.
Oh, wow.
You knock on the door and a rabbi's like, yeah, no. You have to do it 4 times.
Wow.
Because the rabbi's like, okay, are you actually going to do this?
Yeah.
Because we take it very seriously. And once you convert, you were considered Jewish. It's not
Right.
It's not Jewish with an asterisk. It's not a special flavor. You were Jewish.
Yeah.
And so at that point, so I have a Hebrew name. I went through my conversion. Your Hebrew name, if you are born Jewish, is your Hebrew name, whatever it may be, and your parents' name.
Okay.
The child of blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
My name, because I am a convert, is Abraham ve Sarah. So Abraham and Sarah, because I joined the tribe of Judaism, but not from direct lineage.
Right.
But it's understood that I'm just as Jewish as the person sitting next to me.
Yeah.
And when I finally converted, my family asked me some of the most insane questions I've ever been asked in my life. My brother, who is still very religious evangelical, married into an even more evangelical family. And his mother-in-law, mind you, I see this woman maybe once a year at this point, or at that point. Now I don't see her at all. She straight up, in front of everyone, was like, well, what about your penis?
Oh, my gosh.
And I was like, what about
You are
my penis?
kidding me.
100%. It gets worse.
Oh, my gosh.
I said, well, I was a child born in the United States in 1991.
Right. It's generally a thing that's already done.
Right. Like, it wasn't even a discussion. It was just kind of like, my parents were like, yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So it's not a problem. And this woman said, but I thought if you were circumcised, you couldn't be Jewish. I was like, you don't even know the basics.
Wow, that's the what?
Yeah, literally. Like that. And
oh, my God.
I'm sitting there, and my mother, who doesn't understand Judaism, still is looking at me like, please don't yell at this woman. We are at a nice family Christmas celebration or something. Like, please don't. And I was just like, are you kidding me? And then the next thing she says is, so do you hate Jesus? And I was like,
what is happening?
Right, like, who joins a faith because they hate someone?
Jeez.
Yeah, so that was my journey. Yeah.
So, one of the things that you are particularly interested as a mental health advocate, as somebody who will do therapy, is communally inflicted trauma.
Yeah.
So how is that different in the religious world, especially, like, particularly because that's your story, than individually inflicted trauma?
So communal trauma is often the rejection at the hands of a community.
Okay.
And the reason it's different is because if there's an individual trauma, say, for instance, you're going through a domestic violence situation.
Right.
You know, like my mom was.
Right.
In a healthy, functioning community, they become your support.
Yeah.
They help you navigate. They help you find resources. And we recognize, so I'm getting my MSW. I'm in my final year. We as social workers recognize the importance of collective community.
Yeah.
We are all a part of our communities. We're all a part of our systems. What do you do when that system rejects you?
Yeah.
And in the religious context, what do you do when that translates to not only does the community reject you, God has rejected you?
Yeah.
These people who claim to be the voice of God, or deeply religious people, they are rejecting you. And because of that, if they are supposed to be God's people on earth, they're also rejecting you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And God is therefore hating you, ashamed of you, just whatever.
Whatever they say.
You're right. And how do you start to repair that? Because in a normal trauma, normal trauma is a weird thing to say, but in a trauma situation, there's contextualization,
Yeah.
There's understanding all the factors at play. Like,
Yeah.
I may never re-engage with a person who has traumatized me, but I can understand it. I can start to differentiate my existence within that trauma, their role in that trauma, and forgiveness and healing. You know, you can heal from trauma. You can start to accept realities. You can even have reparative relationships. You can say, you know, this person inflicted this trauma. I've addressed it. We've been able to move forward.
Right.
With God, that's much more difficult.
Yeah.
I often compare it to anyone who's lost a parent or a loved one, and you've had a difficult relationship. I lost my dad in 2019, and our relationship was not great.
Yeah.
I have had to repair a relationship with someone who is incapable of speaking back to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in faith, right, we talk about God speaks through us, to us. There's this concept that God is engaging with us. But the minute someone says God speaks to me directly, we go, okay, I think maybe there's an issue.
Right.
And so how do you repair that? How do you start to say, this person who is supposed to be a scion of God,
right,
has said that I am shameful, I am disgusting, I am whatever. How do I repair my relationship to the being that my entire life I've believed is not only the ultimate caregiver,
right,
but is the creator?
Right.
And if you believe that you were born the way that you identify, and we believe God doesn't make mistakes, right? Like that is I don't know a single religion that's like, yeah, God sometimes gets it wrong.
Yeah.
At least not in the Abrahamic tradition.
Right, for sure.
How do you start to say, okay, I was born this way. God made me this way. God doesn't make mistakes. And yet this community that I belong to has told me I am a mistake. I'm an abomination.
Right.
I lost, when I came out, people have known me my entire life, turned on me in a day.
Wow.
I mean, literally, I was a leader in the church. I was a leader in so many things. And people went from, wow, this is an example of a really Christly person, to this is an example of an abomination and a sinner. And so I spent a lot of time searching for proof in the universe that God didn't hate me.
Yeah.
And I went through a period where I hated God.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, I went through a real period of, you're all loving, all knowing, all powerful. Why the hell are you letting this happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why am I being physically hurt? Why am I being emotionally destroyed?
Yeah.
Why am I being threatened by people? You know, all of these things.
Yeah.
When I've checked all of the checks,
boxes, right? You did all the things.
I was in church all the time. I was devout. I prayed without ceasing. I tithed. I did all the things.
Yeah, out of your allowance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's like a lot of pain.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
That's a lot of isolation. And like internally.
Yeah, there's no one you can talk to who gets it.
Yeah. And then there's this whole like stunting of your own ability to figure out what this means.
Well, and I had no guides. I mean, you know, we talk about representation matters.
Yeah.
When I was coming out, there was no representation, or the representation there was was so out of context.
Right. Yeah.
It was, this is a guy living in New York City and blah, blah.
Yeah.
I was living on a farm in the middle of nowhere. Like, New York City didn't matter.
Yeah.
And so many people in the queer community have experienced such profound pain at the hands of the church, at the hands of religion. And often, if you talk about religion, it's talked about in like a kind of fuck that. Like,
yeah, no, for sure.
And it's so much about the church that even if people still believe in God, in their version of God, they don't have a relationship with God that is fostered by anything other than themselves.
Right. So you were talking about you were really angry with God.
Oh, yeah.
If God is all loving, all that stuff. I mean, I would never expect you to find an answer. Because I don't think those questions are ultimately really answerable. But you don't seem like a person who is currently, at least today, super angry with God.
I got lucky. And I do say, well, not
what
luck.
happened?
Yeah. It is a theme in my life, regardless of who it's directed towards. I try not to be bitter.
Right.
I have been. Trust me. I went.
No,
oh,
for sure.
Teenage me was, and like early college me was a lot. I kept searching because I knew on some level that I never went to atheism. I never went to there's nothing.
Right. Yeah.
And so if I believe that there's something, I have to find it. I have to connect to it. I will say going through conversion was incredibly healing for me.
Yeah.
As a mental health practitioner, as a social worker, I would never tell someone that like, hey, you're going through religious trauma, you should convert. That seems less than helpful.
Right. Yeah.
But I think what is more important is being able to start to parse out what is God versus what is God's minions.
Yeah.
And that can be really difficult.
Yeah.
Because it requires you to question everything.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I grew up in a faith where you question nothing.
Right.
To question was to be seen as sinful, to be seen as, going against the church, whatever. And so I started to really sit with what's real for me and what's not. What is impactful? What is meaningful?
Yeah.
The Trinity for me, that's a question I get asked a lot. It was like, how do you give up the Trinity?
Yeah.
The Trinity for me was never that impactful. I never really saw them as separate.
Yeah.
I literally was like, all right, this is God in drag as Jesus. Like, and I never...
That is maybe the first time people have explained the Trinity by saying that Jesus was God in drag. So,
right.
I mean, like you heard it here first.
Right. I mean... the other God on earth, RuPaul, says, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. The Holy Spirit, Jesus, God, all to me seemed like pieces of the same operating model.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really hung up on that.
Yeah.
When the Da Vinci Code came out and like people were losing their minds.
Right.
I remember, and I brought it up in youth group and people were kind of like, because I said, does it matter?
Yeah, right.
Does it make Jesus less special if Jesus was mortal?
Right.
Like, not really. Like, Jesus did incredible things.
Yeah, right. And and nobody called you a heretic, which is exciting.
Oh, people did. People were a little bit
good.
People were like,
we're not going to go there.
Yeah. There was a lot of like, hi, this is youth group. Let's not. And I was like, but I have questions. But I think for me, it was so important in every sense of my life. And I think religion kind of folded into that I defined myself.
Right. Yeah.
Once I started rejecting what I was taught, what I was raised with, it was really easy, or not easy, but really straightforward for me to start being like, well, if I can accept that my version of being a man, of loving someone, of whatever, doesn't look like what I was taught, can't my faith look like that too?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you found your way to that. I don't know. Most of the community that I work with in our like not church group, it's got people of all different religious identifications. But so many people have that story of being traumatized or whatever, and then never getting all the way there.
I think it's hard.
Yeah.
I think it's so hard.
Well, I mean, you did a lot of work. So, like, I think part of it when I'm listening to your story is like, going through converting to Judaism was an enormous amount of trauma work.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And you said healing.
Yeah.
And so you did. It's not like you just like all of a sudden one day arrived and you're like, oh, I figured it out. Right. You did a lot of hard work. So I'm curious, you know, if you were gonna talk to somebody who is your younger self, who is in the thick of like, I've been traumatized, I'm done with it, but also I don't know, like I feel like being totally done with it isn't right either. Like, what would you say to them?
I think the biggest thing is I'm a big believer in all things that you set your own rules in relationships, in dynamics, in friendships.
Yeah.
And I think I have always believed that being faithful was being in a relationship with God.
Okay, yeah.
And so if I'm comfortable saying, yeah, it's really between you and your friend, you and your partner, the dynamics and rules that you live by.
Yeah.
Faith should be the same way.
Yeah.
You know, and listen, I don't think any religion perfectly captures God. And I think that's okay.
Yeah.
For me, one of the big things in Judaism specifically is, what does this mean for you?
Yeah, right.
And so for someone who's out there saying, I don't know what I believe, I know that what I had was hurtful and painful, I would ask, what do you believe? What do you genuinely respond to that makes you feel connected to God, that makes you feel connected to the Spirit, to whatever you want to call it? If it's nature, if it's, the other world, whatever practice resonates with you, let that be your practice.
Yeah.
And there's a great quote that I don't know who originally said it, but Kristen Chenoweth was who I heard it from.
Yes.
She said her grandmother taught her being religious. And she was saying this at I think it was a human rights campaign speech. How can you be a Christian and be a LGBTQ affirming?
Right.
Being religious is like eating a fish. take the part that sustains you, but don't choke on the bones.
Ah, I love that.
Yeah, and that
I love that.
I so resonate with that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
even in Judaism, depending on the variant of Judaism, Orthodoxy, Conservative,
Right.
Reform, Reconstruction, we all interpret it differently.
Uh-huh.
I always say, ask 10 Jews a question, you're going to get 11 answers.
Yeah.
That is part of the nature of Judaism. We question, we really sit with things, and we're able to say, yeah, I don't know that I agree with that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
I don't agree with a passage that's pick a verse in the Old Testament.
Right.
That for me doesn't mean, well, now I have to stop coexisting and believing in God.
Right.
Whereas before it did.
Yeah.
Before I was taught, if you're not following every part of this,
Right.
if you're not perfect, even though Christianity loves to say, we don't want perfect people. I'm like,
Right.
you kind of
Yeah,
do, many of you.
Right. Yeah.
So to my younger self, I would say you are not failing because you aren't fitting into the mold you were given.
Yes. I love that.
I believe if we take anything from any religion,
Yeah.
and I love hearing about people's beliefs.
Yeah.
Tell me what you believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone who has a very strong belief, at the core of it, is always love,
Yeah.
compassion,
Uh-huh.
grace,
Yeah.
and the ability to see outside yourself.
Yeah.
So pursue those.
Yes.
What do you find faith in? Do you find faith in humanity? Despite how messed up the world is on any given Tuesday, I have deep faith in humanity.
Yeah.
In the good in people.
Yeah.
I have deep belief that even in the darkest of times, there is beauty, there is love, there are things worth saving.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I could never get to atheism.
Right.
Because atheism, and mind you, one of my best friends in the world is an atheist.
Right. I've got many great
Yeah.
atheist friends. Yeah.
To be that person who's like, I've got plenty of atheist friends, but I do.
know, for sure. Yeah.
But I think for so many people that I've met, atheism is bred out of despair,
Interesting.
out of hurt,
Yeah.
out of rejection.
Yeah.
I have been so deeply hurt by this thing, I can't believe in it
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I completely understand that impulse. And I think for me, if I believe that there's more than myself, if I believe that there's more than humanity,
Uh-huh.
which I do, I have to also be willing to believe that maybe human beings aren't capable of getting it right.
Yeah. That's good.
Like, every religious text you're reading was written by a human.
Right. That's true.
And I don't care how good they were.
Uh-huh.
Like, listen, in the Jewish faith, Moses, pretty important guy.
Yep.
Also, if you read a lot of the history of Moses that we know,
Yeah.
Moses wasn't always a great guy.
No, he wasn't.
Right.
He was like, when you read the Old Testament, it's full of just complete dysfunction.
100%.
Yeah.
If we're willing to accept then that these great pillars that look at Abraham.
Right. No,
my God, look at
completely.
Abraham. If I can accept that they're flawed,
Yeah.
and I can accept that they're doing the best they can. It's kind of how I look at my dad, who's now dead, my relationship with my mom, and some of the mistakes that were made in my childhood.
Yeah.
I look at and say, they were doing the best they could. Do I think there were ways they could have been better? Absolutely.
Right.
But I think if we're willing to accept a world in which we don't know everything about God, if we're willing to accept God is bigger than any one person's interpretation,
Yeah.
someone saying to you God hates you or you're incapable of being loved by God very quickly gets thrown out.
Yeah.
And then if you can remove that barrier for yourself and meet all of the hate, all of the pain with love and with grace, which sounds like a cop-out, I know.
Right.
Which just love people.
Right.
But the reality is if I love you even if you're not perfect.
Yeah. Right.
And I was taught, even in my evangelical days, that God was the perfect model of love.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I was taught you should love God. You should be a little bit afraid of God.
Right.
But
God will smite you.
Yeah,
But,
right.
but he's loving.
Right.
Right.
But I think ultimately, if I expect that the people in my life give me grace, and that if I give grace, why wouldn't God do the same thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Ben, thank you so much for being here. I feel like, that quote you said, I think we should just sort of end with the words of the most holy Kristen Chenoweth, but blessed be she.
Exactly. Saint Kristen of Oklahoma.
That's right. Religion is like a fish. Take what sustains you and don't choke on the bones.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
All right. We will. Wrong one. Finish.